I've heard whenever somebody talks about AI agents, they always recommend human in the loop as a security control, which basically means that when the agent needs to take some kind of a critical decision or a security related decision, it should ask a human, and the human, once they approve, only then it should proceed with performing that particular action. I think that's complete BS and it's an ineffective control. And let me get into three reasons why I think human in the loop is a completely useless and pointless control in the kind of AI agents we're building. Now, let's talk about what human in the loop is and what it actually looks like. Let's say you're writing code using some kind of a coding agent like Cursor or Codex or Claude Code, right? Now, the agent needs to run a particular bash command. Now, the bash command, it doesn't know whether it needs to run it or not. It asks you for approval saying, hey, I need to run rm-rf, and it asks you to approve that or not approve it. Now, this entirely relies on the fact that the agent is putting the responsibility on the user to make a decision on whether it should go ahead or not. And that is essentially human in the loop. Now, the problems of human in the loop, at least the three major problems that I see, are this. One, the type of agents we're building, right? The first one is that most of us are building agents for the enterprise or for the organization that are supposed to be autonomous, which means that the agents are supposed to work without any kind of human interaction. That's what unlocks the real value of an agent. If a human being is essentially pressing on yes, no buttons every single time, like in Squid Games, it's not really a very sensible option. It doesn't really become an agent. A human really just becomes a button pusher for an agent's decisions that are being taken entirely by the agent, which means that autonomous agents that are the bulk of what we're trying to build within the enterprise don't really operate within that framework of human in the loop in the first place. So that as a security control probably does not make much sense at all, simply because most of the agents we're trying to build or aspiring to build don't really fall into that bucket of human controlled agents or that have any kind of human interaction in the first place. We all like to think that approval based systems are very good because of this, but it ends up being pointless because it essentially defeats the purpose of the agent in the first place, which is autonomy. So that, I would say, is reason number one why I think human in the loop is complete BS. Let's talk about reason number two, which is fatigue, right? Now, in the year 2022 and thereafter, there was a series of attacks that was perpetrated by a criminal group called Lapsus, where they compromised Uber, Cisco, and Microsoft, and so on. Now, they used a standard attack technique where they used an MFA fatigue approach. They basically bombarded somebody. So they pretended to be Uber IT or something like that, and they bombarded someone with two-factor authentication accept requests, right? So whenever you have two-factor authentication set up, now all of us, I hope, have two-factor authentication. It's a great security control, but in some cases, when you need to approve something, you get this two-factor authentication message saying, hey, are you allowing this particular transaction? Is this something that is allowed? And what happened in that particular case was that somebody pretended to be Uber IT or Microsoft IT or Cisco IT or whatever it is, and then they bombarded that person who they were trying to compromise with two-factor authentication messages saying that approve this, approve this, approve this, and then that person just probably gave into that fatigue and approved it, and once they approved it, they were compromised, and because of that compromise, adversaries and attackers were able to gain access to the environment and do a bunch of bad stuff. Now, this is probably going to be tenfold with agents. Imagine that you're writing code and you're writing hundreds and thousands of lines of code, and every single bash script that you need is going to require you to approve or not approve, or every single URL that the agent needs to call needs to be approved or not approved. In that particular case, you will see that the human gets fatigued pretty quickly and they would just start approving everything or set it to auto approve. This is typically what happens with human in the loop systems. They're not designed for the kind of bombardment that agents would do. Imagine loading up an agent that runs 6, 7 different sub agents, each of them performing autonomous independent tasks, and all of those tasks having some level of approval work chain based on a human being's approval. It just does not work. humans will not take the time to review the data being approved. And even if they do, it may not make much sense, right? So as a result, you'll see that humans generally set it to auto approve, or they'll generally set a blanket approve type of thing. And that still defeats the purpose of human in the loop in the first place. So human in the loop, reason number 2, which is why it just does not work. Let's start with reason number 3 as to why I think human in the loop is BS. And this has to do with the context of the human in the loop approach in itself. Right? Now, we assume that when we have a human in the loop control, the human makes an educated decision on whether this action should be approved or not. Now, this is generally not possible with agents. And let me explain why. Let me take that previous example that I've been talking about throughout this video, which is there is your coding agent. It comes up with a thing saying, hey, should you run this bash script? Now, that bash script may be something a lot more complicated than rm-rf, right? It must be much more complicated than that. It might be much more nuanced than that. And it's not always possible for the human to understand context from an agent to deal with human in the loop, because the agent is performing a whole bunch of interconnected tasks to achieve its goal. And as a result of that, there may be several tasks that may be offloaded to sub-agents that still require human in the loop. And because of that, you will generally see that the context for each specific task or each small piece of the task, it doesn't really have much context from a human perspective. The human really doesn't know the sequence or the specific way it is being implemented, or the way the sub-agents are being called, or the agents are being called, or the tools are being called by an agent. This essentially brings about a huge gap in understanding. Even if that person is a very competent and capable person, it still does not mean that that person gets a full context and that person understands the risks of what they are doing. It's like giving someone who is completely unaware, making a decision on something that is extremely critical, giving them an approve or a deny. They are going to make mistakes. In fact, they're going to make a bunch of mistakes, which is why human in the loop, again, does not make sense from an agent security perspective. So far, we have established that human in the loop is mostly BS. But what actually works? What are the controls that really work when you want to secure agents or you want to secure autonomous agents? Let's talk about some of those controls and get into it, right? The first one I would say is the least privilege of the agent itself. The agent really needs to be set up in a way that it is performing actions that it only has access to and is not given broad, unscoped access to a whole bunch of different tools and different operating environments. This is a fundamental thing to ensure that the blast radius of whatever the agent does is relatively limited based on the kind of access it has to different tools and, by extension, different systems. The other thing that you have to build into the agent itself is a whole bunch of sandboxing and restricting operating system level privileges from an agent's blast radius perspective, especially for coding agents or agents that run commands and execute tools at the operating system level. Now, this becomes a very important thing, because this essentially does not require a user to have to get the entire burden of trying to understand what that agent is trying to do on the backend operating system. So things like SecOm profiles or AppArmor profiles or other ways to sandbox that you have would be a much better way to restrict this and restrict the blast radius of an agent, rather than asking a human whether every single time this particular thing is allowed or not. This again extends on top of the first thing which I said, which is least privilege, which extends to this as well, least privilege on the operating system as well. The other thing that you have to do when it comes to agents is to provide a strong sense of guardrails built into the agent implementation itself. Now, guardrails is basically where an agent automatically has, again, an autonomous agent essentially has certain rules or certain semantic rules built in, where it can determine whether this action is risky or not, or whether this action should be taken or not, based on the guardrails that are previously configured. This can be thought out earlier rather than having it being applied at runtime and making the human being a control block at runtime. this can be thought out earlier, implemented earlier, and scaled up as the application or the agent gets bigger and bigger. The other thing that you should definitely consider is having a way to detect and identify stuff in the background and reversibility in the background, rather than having this as a constraint placed on a human being in the beginning. Now, for instance, let us say an action has been taken, let us say some kind of a financial action has been taken, which is maybe suspicious as far as an agent's rule set is concerned or a guardrail is concerned. Maybe having a way to reverse that particular financial decision for up to 24 hours as an exception, with the detailed context getting populated for the user to make decisions on that so that they can reverse the decision of an agent, may be much more scalable and preferable in many cases, rather than having a human being become basically like a railway channel of sorts, where the human being has to keep pressing switches in order to approve or disapprove certain agent decisions. So, with all this, of course, there are more things that you can do from a security perspective, but these are the few things that definitely should be taken in mind to prevent using very, very poor and brittle controls like human in the loop to protect AI agents.